Live from Sacramento City Hall, it's the SacVibes podcast.
Hello, everyone. It is February 5th, 2025. I'm Danielle from the CE team, and you're chilling with SacVibes, the local government podcast where we educate, engage, and empower residents from the city of Sacramento. Again, I'm Danielle. I'm going to pass it to my left.
I'm Lynette.
I'm Ari.
And I'm Greg, and we have a special guest today.
Hey everyone, I'm Nguyen.
And yeah, so we have our special guest, but before we go into your juicy topic for today, how's everyone doing?
Not too bad. I stayed up late because my daughter had an essay due the last minute. But it was good. She had made a good essay.
Did you have to review it? Is that why?
A little bit, yeah. She wanted me to review it. She's like very particular and wants to do best in every class. So
Oh,
That's great.
I'm a little tired though. I usually sleep at 9, so 11
Yeah.
o'clock is late for me.
Oh,
Goodness.
well, I'm doing bad. You guys are doing good. I'm doing bad.
Uh-oh, what happened?
Life, CNN, BBC News, Fox News. Every time I turn on the TV, I just get mad. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
you know, I'm just doing the best I can at
We
this
have to
point.
give ourselves grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rest from.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been tough. It's been tough.
It's been tough.
It has been
Trying to
tough,
block
yeah.
everything out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
keep going, and that's the only choice we have. But it's hard to kind of deal with it all.
Yeah, it's a lot. The uncertainty and just,
Yeah. And I think the news is kind of milking it too.
yeah.
They like the way they word things, but they've always been like that.
Yeah.
It's like a doomsday.
How are you doing, Ari?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there. I have a birthday, so I'm kind of excited about that.
Happy
We
yeah,
have
we
have a
have
birthday.
We have a
We
birthday.
got a birthday.
Like half the table here has birthdays.
Absolutely. So super excited about that.
We're all Aquariuses, huh? I had
We
my birthday a
are.
few weeks ago.
When your birthday?
March. I'm in March.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Also an
I'm a
Aquarius?
Pisces.
Or-
Okay.
Pisces.
Well, you close.
Pisces.
Close.
You right.
Okay.
A Pisces is
Spring
cool with
babies.
Aquarius.
My birthday is Super Bowl Sunday.
Mm.
Turn up.
You gonna tell the listeners where you're gonna be? She'll be at the Chuck E. Cheese on how?
No, y'all
sorry,
can
no,
come pull
how
up.
are
Y'all
they?
can come pull up, listeners. I'm gonna be at Tom's Watch Bar in Doco. So come pull up.
Are you rooting for the Chiefs or the Eagles or neither?
That was my question, too.
Right?
So I'm rooting for the Eagles, and I'm gonna tell you why. There's a comedian, Gilly the Kid.
Yeah.
He's
Okay.
hilarious.
Yeah.
And so he has just really embraced being a fan and brought his neighbors in with him. And so it's hilarious. The theme song has become Blow the Whistle by
Yeah.
Too Short is the official theme song for Philadelphia Eagles.
Are you serious? That's their
Oh my
official.
God.
That's their
Blow the
official. He has a neighbor that wears the Eagles outfit, and then a neighbor, a very age-friendly neighbor that comes across. He always creeps across the screen. You'll see it in the background with a broom. So he's been nicknamed Broomy. And they're actually going to the Super Bowl. He's taking them to the Super Bowl. And so
I love that.
they're a whole little vibe. If you
Wow.
haven't, check out his Instagram because it's
Yeah.
hilarious. I just love how he got
cutting
community involved. He cuts up. It's hilarious. So
He cuts
yeah,
up on
that's what I'm rooting
Instagram.
for. I just want to do the dance. I learned how to do the dance. So it's a little dance that goes with it. So
Oh.
I'll be doing the dance.
I'm just rooting for not the Chiefs.
I know.
Yeah. Tired of them.
Yeah.
You're not a Swiftie.
good.
You're not a Swiftie.
Negative.
I'm a Swiftie.
I know. I think that
She's like, I know.
that was one of the first facts I learned about you.
And she still took the job.
Yeah. But on another note, we had council last night.
Did.
There wasn't a lot going on. There were a lot of items on consent. I think one of the biggest ones to me was the city is moving forward with a housing project on R Street, 805 R Street, really geared towards our artist community. This is low and affordable housing. So it's 241 units. Over 20 of those units will be dedicated to our unhoused neighbors or people that are on the verge of being unhoused. And then will be some commercial space that is dedicated for artists to be able to utilize and use. So we are super excited about having 241 units coming to our street.
And
It definitely
didn't you
deserves
say
that.
they were going to start in like a month too? Like
Yeah,
they
they're
were very
getting ready to
quick?
start. Yeah, so
That's
Pretty
good.
fast.
yeah, so that's probably I would say one of the most exciting things and a really good use of some remaining ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan Act. Just to warn you, we have this pie in the face thing that if you say an acronym and you don't explain what it is, because we want to make sure folks understand us, and as city staff, we like to use acronyms. So you have to
Yes.
actually explain it first. So great use of $3 million in ARPA funds to get this project. So shout out to Yayin and Economic Development and Axel. He's been they've been very supportive and making sure that we get housing here, much needed housing.
For
So,
sure.
Yeah.
Much needed.
absolutely. So that was kind of the major updates at council. There's been a lot of news media and attention on the city's partnership with the California Black Chamber, a lot of incorrect information being reported in the Sacramento Bee. And it was great to see community members, business owners that have benefited through the partnership between the city of Sacramento and the California Black Chamber. And they actually came in support and spoke on items not on the agenda, on the impact that the Black Chamber has had. And it was interesting because it just wasn't Black residents or Black business owners. It was other folks as well saying that they've always been a resource no matter what. So,
Cool.
so that was good to see.
That's good. So today we are talking about some really cool stuff that I've been kind of waiting for. For those listening and those watching, we are going to have a cool little downloadable guide that will be attached to this episode. It's called The History of Housing Injustice in Sacramento. And it's just a little guide that explains some of the historical context that we're going to be talking about today. And it includes a map where a lot of the issues of redlining came about. We have a few experts at our table today on this podcast to talk about that. So, Ari, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, I thought you was talking about me. You ask me planning questions all the time. I thought he was talking about me.
Real quick, because you were giving that intro, and I know what redlining is because I work with Ari and I work with the city now. But just real quick, like, what is redlining for our listeners
Oh, yes,
who might
yes.
not?
Thank you.
know?
Oh, she asked me a question.
Got the hard question.
Redlining, and I'm going to read my notes, is a process that was used by banks and loan officers or what have you to, not loan officers, but folks in real estate to keep specific neighborhoods free from people of color back in like the early 30s and what
Yeah,
have
so
you.
very juicy topic.
Yeah.
And I think too that like because there's so much information to unpack and things to go over, like if, people want another episode or like more in depth, I think let us know in the comments,
Yeah, and we actually this might blow up into 2 episodes.
Yeah.
So we'll see how good the conversation gets. And
Ari is
then-
ready to launch. She's like,
Yeah.
get me in.
Yeah.
It's a juicy
So,
one.
Yeah, redlining was a tactic that the Federal Housing
Authority.
really leveraged to really prevent folks from living in certain neighborhoods and really kind of dictated where you could and couldn't buy houses. It even made it illegal for people to sell their houses to people of color. And
That's
so
you're taking the shine away from our guests.
I told you I thought I was the expert. I thought I was the expert.
We got our expert.
Okay,
got three
we gotta pass
experts.
it now. We gotta pass it now.
All right, so take it away, y'all.
Oh man. Hi everyone listening. Nguyen, we're so excited to have you here to talk about Sacramento's history with housing, the injustices that have plagued Sacramento, and then how we're moving forward to rectify those injustices. My name is Ari. I think a little bit more about my background is I am a trained historian. So I did go to school for history and to practice history. And that was kind of my introduction to planning. And so what really sparked my interest in planning is in 2014, the city voted to keep the Kings as well as build the arena. And I left that year, and I spent a year in Montreal, and I lived in downtown, and I saw how the city was built, and I was like, wow, this is so convenient. Like, why can't other cities be that way, you know? And then I came back and I saw the changes in Sacramento, as well as the start process for the arena building. And so I was like, whoa, what happened here? And that's when I learned about the site of the arena is also the place where urban renewal happened for the West End, and how it was on contested land and the controversy surrounding the arena, which led me down the path of like, okay, I want to study this a little bit more. So can you tell us a little bit about your introduction to planning and how you got here and your purpose for studying planning?
Yeah, and I'm also a big fan of history, so that's great to hear. So I am a associate planner with the city of Sacramento in the long range planning section, and I would say I got into planning mostly because I've always been very curious about, growing up in Sacramento and seeing how different neighborhoods look, how different they are from each other, the people that live in each neighborhood, and how oftentimes they're so drastically different from one another just by crossing a highway or even crossing a road. And I always wondered, why are certain neighborhoods, they have better streets, they have street lighting, they have sidewalks, they have better parks, better schools. Like, how did that all happen? And growing up in a low-income family, I always wanted to pursue something that was, giving back to the community, And so I went to UC Davis and I studied community development and also environmental design. I also care about the environment and how to grow, more sustainably as a society. And so, I landed in planning as a planner, and one of the things that struck me about planning was it is a field that is dominated mostly by white folks historically. And it's I would say that's because it's not a romanticized profession. Not a lot of people know about it. It's I didn't know about planning until I was in college, really. So I wasn't exposed to the idea that there were people planning and working on policies and how cities develop over time. I didn't know all of that until I attended college. And so I think most people are in that situation where they're not exposed to the profession of planning. And so, one of the reasons why I'm here today, I think, is also to spread awareness about planning as a profession. And trying to encourage more folks to be interested in planning, study planning, look into it. And there's a lot of planning adjacent professions as well that you can, pursue as a career.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So to all the listeners out there, get involved with your city. Know that your city is being planned and designed on your behalf. And if you have children, train them up to go to school or do urban planning or something adjacent. So we'll probably go through like a brief timeline of the history in Sacramento, kind of starting with the 1930s. So we have restrictive covenants or racial covenants, as they're often called, which are clauses in home deeds that essentially state that the homeowner cannot sell of the property to anyone that is Black or minority. These are very specific and very permanent. Now they are unconstitutional, so they are obsolete, but they still exist, and some of them exist in our Fab 40s is our common neighborhood. And then we go over to...
And in Oak Park, too. So when I bought my home in 2009, it was still in the deed, so it still says it. And you can go to the county and get it taken out, but I thought, I want to keep this history.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's on my deed.
And I think that's also a good point to add that, how it's still so prevalent in the present day.
Yeah.
Just everyone in this common circle it could happen to them.
And not just here in Sacramento, but a lot of cities.
A lot of cities, yeah.
And the ability to remove those covenants or racially restrictive covenants from your property was a recent state law. So up until 2 years ago, you couldn't even do that. It was a part of the legacy, of real estate in America.
Yeah.
Speaks to a lot what's going on. And then we kind of blend into the next decade where we get redlining, which we talked about briefly at the beginning of the episode. So redlining, some of you may have saw, and I think we're going to insert a map, but it's a colored map, a graded neighborhood map. And the colors are usually like a red, pinkish, a yellow, a blue, and a green. And essentially these grades for the neighborhood, it could be A, B, C, D, shows how desirable or undesirable your neighborhood is. And also, it's a tool used by insurance companies, banks, to ensure that loans and insurance are not given to people of color. So if you're looking at a map and you see a green area, a Black person or you, Nguyen, could not purchase in this area because your loan wouldn't be supported and your insurance wouldn't be supported.
It's the red areas.
Oh, I'm sorry. I flipped it. That was my bad.
I was like, wait a minute.
That was literally my bad. So,
Okay.
yes. So if you're looking at the red areas, everyone at this table on this podcast wouldn't be able to purchase a home there,
Right.
Or get their house insured. And so this isn't just relevant for Sacramento. This happened across the nation. There are several cities. I think in California, we also have Stockton, Oakland, San Francisco, and San Diego that were also redlined.
Every major city.
A
Yeah.
major city.
Yep.
Yeah, this was a federal program.
Yes.
Yep.
And I want to kind of rewind a little bit and this is a very exciting podcast for me, just to be having the opportunity to talk about this because it's something I'm very passionate about. Because, like I said, I've always wondered, why cities look the way they look and why there are inner cities and outer cities and suburbs and, the different components of, modern day American cities. And so I just want to kind of quickly highlight that a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, the way I see it is they're sort of like deleted scenes off from a movie that it's sort of history that has been sort of not talked about because it's very complex, very nuanced, and it's not something that's taught in the history books. And so unless you look into it, you wouldn't know about the history of how America historically has linked race with monetary value or social value. And I mean that's what racism at the root is you're linking the color of your skin or your racial background to some type of value system, whether it's a monetary value or a social, how you're standing in society. And so there's many ways that occurred, many mechanisms. We learn about, of course, slavery back in the early American history all the way up to the 1800s. And then, of course, you have Jim Crow laws and you had racial segregation in businesses and whether or not you are treated as an American citizen even. And those are all the overt, things that you learn about in history. But then there's some of the more covert things that isn't often talked about, are things like redlining that we're going to be talking about today, exclusionary zoning that indirectly segregates without even mentioning race, based off of economic barriers. And we'll talk about several court cases at the Supreme Court level that kind of goes through we're going to walk through the history of how this all happened.
I like you.
I was thinking the same thing. I've been working with him for a while, and I thought I liked him, but now I know I really do like you. Absolutely.
So I want to
I'm on
do
the spectrum,
something really quick while we have a little break here. If you're watching or listening, take a look at that map that we attached with this, and I want to give you kind of like a visual. So if you can imagine Sacramento, downtown Sacramento, with the barriers of 50, I-5, and Business 80, right? That area is mostly yellow. What way is Midtown now is mostly yellow, and that means it's a third grade, right? So folks, it's kind of a mixed area. But like in East Sac, it's blue and green, so it's mostly white, and you see that kind of legacy playing out today. Likewise, in Land Park, you got a green area down there. And then to where Doco is right now, it's actually red, right? So you got sections around Southside Park and north of City Hall. So I'm not going to spoil that for y'all, but I'm just letting y'all know that's the red area. And you got South Sac. Some parts of Oak Park are yellow. Some parts in Curtis Park are blue. So you can see, like, the neighborhoods that we live in now, it was kind of orchestrated that way on purpose. And that's what blew my mind when I was doing research for this. So
Yeah.
So is there anything else you wanted to add on redlining?
Yeah. So that map that we were looking at earlier of the redlining that happened so this happened in the 30s and 40s, right after the Great Depression, and it was during the New Deal era. I believe it's under Roosevelt.
Yeah, FDR.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry,
FDR.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Okay, thank you.
I'm
yes.
just
President.
nodding like yes.
I am like,
So under his administration, they were dealing with the Great Depression, which began in the 1910s, 1920s. And so to get out of the Great Depression, one of the ways that they came up with was they created the Federal Housing Authority, the FHA. And what that agency did was they essentially they were trying to stimulate bank activity, lending activity. And so they would encourage banks to make loans out to people, to Americans, based off of how much insurance the federal government was able to provide for that mortgage. And so, for instance, during the Great Depression, a lot of folks lost their jobs. They had very low incomes, working very, very low-paying jobs. I mean, that was the case for all across the board in the U.S., even the white working class. And so to get out of that, to encourage people to buy homes, to purchase property, to build wealth back up again from the bottom up, the FHA basically stepped in and said, "Hey, if you're going to loan money to Mr. John Smith over here, I know his credit score isn't great, I know his income isn't great, but we're going to ensure." We're going to basically guarantee you that if he isn't able to pay back his mortgage, we'll step in and pay for you.
Must
So
be
that's-
nice.
Yeah.
Right?
Must be nice
And so
to be insured.
yeah, right. Yeah. And so yeah, that's and that practice is still we still have FHA loans today. A lot of us who need that extra leg up when we buy our homes, our first time home buyer programs. That's what that's the same idea here, is that the federal government would insure and back that loan to folks. And so during that whole process, of course, at that time, there was, of course, a lot of racist sentiment in American society. We're talking about late 1800s to early 1900s. A lot of Black Americans were beginning to, post-slavery, find success. They were becoming, moving up the economic ladder in America. Some of them started to buy homes in America's white neighborhoods, of course, which at the time created a lot of backlash, a lot of opposition. A lot of neighborhoods were up in arms about the fact that, hey, like, we don't want these people here in our neighborhoods. What can we do about it? And so, so redlining is one of the ways. We're going to talk about other mechanisms as well. But let's start with redlining. Was sort of incorporated into, at the federal level. What the FHA did was they surveyed cities across America and graded communities and neighborhoods based off of how insurable these neighborhoods were. And that was, there are many criteria, but the main one was, of course, the racial makeup of the community. The more non-whites or non-Caucasians there were in the community, the higher the risk is what they call it. It was a more risky neighborhood to get loans. And so, the effect of that was, of course, no one wanted to invest in these neighborhoods because they were risky neighborhoods. And there was no reason to invest in them. Money was not flowing into these neighborhoods. And then on top of that, the people who lived in these neighborhoods, which most of them were people of color or lower income folks, even if they wanted to get a loan to, let's say, open a business, buy a property, purchase a home, they wouldn't be able to because the FHA wouldn't insure their loan. And so they were stuck, in the renter sort of like landlord dynamic, and they had no option to get out of that.
It's a double whammy.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, I'm sorry, we can't do anything for you. You don't have insurance.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like a way of denying without denying.
And it's
Absolutely.
It's the same in the present too, right? It's like when you purchase a home, they're going to ask you, okay, do you have homeowner's insurance? Or when you go to
Right.
purchase a car, they don't
Right.
let you leave the lot unless you can procure your insurance.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
So
trap
you had
process.
the federal government designing these loans for certain people. And then on the other side, around that same time, because now we're in the 30s and 40s, then you had folks coming back from war. You had the GI Bill,
That's right.
That's right.
which helped boost a lot of white wealth,
Yep.
where these veterans came back and were able to have free education, buy homes. But because of discrimination and segregation, it excluded Black veterans.
That's right.
who are unable to benefit off of the full benefits of the GI Bill. So what you will see throughout this episode is intentional government harm to a lot of communities that help block Black and brown wealth while systemically boosting white wealth, and how it was the systems in place, the government.
Yeah, and that's another great example of the GI Bill and how the racism manifested in a public policy that was made at the federal level. But I do want to put a disclaimer out there that when we talk about the government, right? I think we should keep in mind that the government, we're City of Sacramento employees. There's a lot of departments, a lot of factions, a lot of ideologies. Of course, there were good people. There were people who were fighting for justice within the government. But at the time, it was the balance was skewed towards the folks who were leaning towards the inequitable and racist mindset of the other, placing other people at a lower value than they are based off of the color of their skin. And so that it was skewed towards that direction at the time. So I just want to, there's not one single person to blame. It was a whole, like Lynette said, a whole system that was put in place.
Yeah.
Literally designed.
It was laws,
Yeah.
policies, regulations, right?
I know y'all are going to get into this, but it's wild to think, like, even though we're looking at maps from, the 30s and 40s, the effects of, that prejudice and that intentional, lawmaking is still felt today.
Absolutely.
We see
100%.
it in our environment today.
And the folks that live in those neighborhoods are getting the blame
Exactly.
for that, which is crazy,
Yeah.
considering it was designed that way from the beginning.
Yeah.
But people don't learn that history. We don't learn this in
Until
school.
today.
Until right now.
Well, now it's almost illegal to teach about this. So
Right.
That's another day. That's another topic.
glad to be in Sacramento, California.
Yeah.
So just to provide some more present day of how these policies show up in the present is one, the city has the urban forest plan, and it shows the heat canopy or the tree canopy of the city. That is a direct correlation. I think that if we overlaid the maps, it would be very, very similar.
Oh, yeah, right.
Or you'll see school closures in certain neighborhoods because of the tax base and the property values in the neighborhood can't support the schools. And for the listeners, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but public schools are funded by the property tax base of the community that it's in.
Right.
And
Let's
when
go
you
back to the trees for a second.
I was going to go back to tree canopy.
Go ahead.
So when I came to the city and I heard tree canopy, I'm like, what are they talking about? So essentially, tree canopy is when you have streets that are lined and kind of cover the street. So in some neighborhoods, poorer neighborhoods, you don't have a lot of trees. And so it gets hotter. It's hotter in the summer, which means it costs you more to run your air. And so tree canopy is kind of it provides shade over the sidewalk and over the street. So when you hear tree canopy, that's what they're referring to, is how it kind of lines and protects the street. What were you going to say, Greg?
Yeah, just to add to that, you see those beautiful streets with trees having shade all the way through, like in the 40s, right?
I know,
And you're
so
like,
nice.
oh.
But then
You
you
just
go
walk.
down to certain parts of South Sac or Oak Park, and there's no trees at all,
Right.
Yeah.
even though the houses are the same age.
Right.
Right. So it's tied to, where neighborhoods were graded on this first map from the 1930s, and the effects of that, that you were pointing out earlier, Danielle, the fact that trees take a long time to get big, right? And so it's going to take, generations to get that.
For those neighborhoods to
to get
use
the
their
same kind of
canopy.
shade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're in the 40s, 50s, 50s. We have the Federal Highway Act.
Mm.
Well, let me before we get there, we can let me talk a little bit about the racially restricted covenants. So the racially restricted covenants was another mechanism that I think there's evidence of it being used back into the mid 1800s. It's essentially we still have them today. They're called covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs. They operate very similarly to HOA regulations. It's essentially a private agreement between neighbors within a community that if you want to live in this neighborhood, you must abide by these rules. And this is a legal practice that's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of reasons why we have them. There's reasons related to maintaining your house, maintaining the trees on the streets, rules about putting up fences in the front yard. There's a lot of good things, but at the time, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, this was used by many home builders and subdivisions developers to also restrict people of color from buying homes in certain neighborhoods.
Yep.
And so let me go back a little bit to in the early 1910s, in response to all the the great migration of Black Americans into the North and Western states, looking for a new life, looking for opportunity. During the America's Industrial Revolution, there's a lot of jobs out there, and so a lot of migration happened from the South to the Northern states. And in addition to that, we're also talking about immigrants from other countries, from other parts of the world. We had Indians from India, Mexicans, Chinese immigrants, Japanese immigrants, Jewish immigrants, and then, believe it or not a lot of people know about this, but even Europeans, Southern Europeans, were at some point in early American history were also discriminated against. We're talking about Italians, we're talking about Irish people who were seen as an inferior race of Caucasians. They call them the Southern Europeans. And so, there's a lot of complexity when it comes to how race has been defined and, where whiteness, where the boundary of whiteness lands. It's been very fluid throughout history. But at that time, with the influx of immigrants, of non-whites, non-Caucasians, that led to a lot of cities trying to pass local racial zoning laws that explicitly discriminated against people of color. And in their own words, a lot of them were trying to preserve the public peace in quotation marks and prevent conflict within their own citizenry. And so they passed all these zoning laws to keep people of color out of neighborhoods. And so that was legally challenged at the Supreme Court level in 1917. It was a case called Buchanan versus V. Worley. That Supreme Court ruled that city zoning laws that reference race were unconstitutional, that was not allowed. And so in response to that ruling, a lot of folks who were building homes, a lot of folks who were developing land turned to these racially restrictive covenants, these private agreements, as a backdoor to enforce racial segregation, but through a private means and not through a public policy. And so there's also the government side of things. There's people trying to do good, but then you also have people in the private sector, in the real estate industry, historically, that also try to exert their own influence in the process. So again, it's not just government. It's complex. There's a lot of players and stakeholders here that were all fighting for what they believed in. And
I didn't realize that happened in 1917, but interesting. And how
I mean, a
long
lot of
it's
stuff
taken.
happened back then.
Yeah. But I mean, just to 1917.
I didn't know it started that early.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I thought this map was the beginning of it, but it goes earlier.
But the racial covenants are real. I think we learned through the African American Experience Project that a lot of Black people came from the South through the military.
Mm-hmm.
So the military was huge here. And so in the 40s, 50s, my family was one of them coming from Mississippi. And if it wasn't for a white woman who actually purchased land for my grandfather, and she bought it for them, from her, my family wouldn't be in Oak Park. And so it's not that far removed.
It's not that far if you think about it.
It's not that far,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago, but it really isn't.
yeah, I live in the house that had to be purchased from a white woman so that my grandfather could buy it. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
on that, let me get into that, because then, so when you have redlining, and then when you have racially restricted covenants, and you have those two mechanisms, one was public policy and one was private sector driven practice, and you have them together, what you end up with is you have neighborhoods where people of color wanted to get a loan to open a business, to buy a home, but they couldn't get a loan. And so let's just say that a lot of folks who, let's say, had a very successful business, they accumulated a lot of wealth, and let's say they wanted to branch out and buy a property somewhere else that was in the green, where they can get a loan because it's not a risky neighborhood. Well, then you have these now in those green areas, racially restricted covenants saying that if you are a person of color, if you are non-Caucasian, you could not buy a property and you could not live in these neighborhoods as a homeowner. And so, you have sort of that double mechanism where even if you had the money, the wealth, you were very successful as a person of color in America and you wanted to buy your own property in a better neighborhood, in a white neighborhood, you still couldn't.
So just for my own clarification then, redlining is the mechanism that was used to keep people of color out of certain neighborhoods. And then the covenants...
From owning property.
From
owning property.
Owning property
And then-
in certain neighborhoods.
And then the covenants kind of kept it that way.
Yeah.
So you couldn't even sell it after initially buying it.
So like how
Because
our
neighbors would
neighborhood-
get together and say, we don't want these
Yeah.
kind of
I
people
like it
in our
the way
neighborhood.
it
I
is.
like it the way it is.
Yeah.
Don't have anybody that doesn't look like us in the neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah, and basically it was like they can stay in the blighted areas of the city,
Right.
which were the red line areas.
Right.
So for those listening and who find this topic very interesting, they want to learn more, the city of Sacramento has a report called the Race and Place Report that's available online, and I'm sure Greg will upload that to as a link on the
for sure.
podcast. But yeah, please, it's a very informational report that talks about the history of redlining, of racial segregation and housing policy in Sacramento specifically.
This is a great conversation, y'all. And unfortunately, we're actually at our time. We are definitely going to continue this conversation for the next episode. But in the meantime, I wanted to thank you, Nguyen, for your time today. And we will continue our discussions about, historical injustices around housing in 2 weeks. Thank you for vibing with us.
And follow us on social media, y'all.
And we'll see y'all. Peace.
See ya.